What's up, Wednesday Night Live? Thank you for tuning in tonight from wherever you are. For the last couple weeks, we've been talking about stuff God's been doing in my heart, and this week it's semi-related to my message from Sunday. Those of you who were there or watched online might remember a quote from the French Renaissance philosopher Michel de Montaigne. He who fears he shall suffer already suffers what he fears. And for the last week or so, I've been ruminating every day on the things I'm suffering, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, not because they've happened, but because I've allowed my mind to be consumed with this fear that they might happen. And I've been thinking about the weight I carry around because of that. And I know I'm not alone. Like so many of us, especially right now in the craziness of life in this season of 2020, have a whole lot of fears and worries that are heavy. And they rob us of joy and peace and life. And the question I want to ask us tonight is this: are those fears even legitimate? Are they worth giving headspace to any longer? Those of you who know me know that history and words are two of my favorite things. And so I've always had a deep appreciation for the ancient Spartans. They were a warrior cult whose military bravery fought off kings and emperors. And in some ways, they even saved the concept of democracy for the modern world. And they were also famous for the way they used words. They were the originators of laconic phrases. Laconia is the region of Greece where Sparta is located. And a laconic phrase, if you don't know what that is like this turn of phrase where somebody doesn't mince words. They just say something short and straight to the point that communicates more than the phrase itself. For instance, when the Duke of Wellington was sent to be an English envoy to France in the early 1800s, he went to this fancy state dinner, and a whole bunch of the French generals who fought under Napoleon, whom Wellington had crushed at Waterloo just a few years prior, they refused to speak to him, and they turned away every time he was nearby. And some of the diplomats and high society folks noticed this, and they approached him and they apologized, and Wellington famously looked at them and replied, "'Tis no matter. I've seen their backs before." Savage! Or another great example is from the Spartans themselves, when Xerxes and his 1,000,000-man Persian army demanded that King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans surrender by laying down their weapons at Thermopylae. Leonidas replied, "Malone labe, come and get them." But my favorite laconic phrase of all time, and it's one I was reminded of this week as I thought about whether I really need to be afraid of the things I am afraid of, comes from the Spartans in 345 BC. Philip II of Macedon, he's the father of Alexander the Great, had conquered most of Greece, and he turned towards Sparta and sent a messenger to ask them whether he ought to approach them as a friend or a foe. Basically letting them know if they submitted peacefully and just joined his empire, there didn't need to be any bloodshed. And Philip knew he could use fear to conquer people without even having to use his army. And so he asked, should I come as friend or foe? And the Spartans sent the messenger back with a single word reply: neither, which enraged Philip. And he immediately dispatched a scroll to Sparta that read, "If I win this battle, you will be slaves forever. You are advised to submit without further delay. For if I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." And the Spartans sent a scroll back to Philip. And he unrolled it and read their reply. If. It's the single greatest military response in history. It communicated a whole lot more than that single word. It showed such a lack of fear and a total lack of respect that Philip actually turned his army around and didn't even attempt to go fight the Spartans. And his heir, Alexander the Great, conquered a massive portion of the globe, stretching from Egypt all the way to India, and he left Laconia alone. He never once attempted to enter the south of Greece. If. I was reading the book of John yesterday afternoon, and in chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus is describing the devil, this great ancient enemy of our souls. He says this: he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he's a liar and the father of lies. And it hit me that so much of what I fear about my life, about my family, about revision, about everything else in 2020 is based on lies. And you guys, I think the same thing goes for you. The strategy the enemy has deployed for the destruction of our souls is a lie-based strategy. And when we believe those lies in our hearts, and we're just filled with fear that causes us to suffer things that haven't even happened, we're leaning into the lies of the liar. And what happens is our minds race. Well, if this happens, then if my job, then if my kids, then if coronavirus, if my bank account, if the stock market, if my spouse, if my friends, then, and we live in fear of the then, and it steals life from us while we are still alive. And listen, I'm not trying to say there aren't some legitimate concerns about the world right now. But I want to challenge us tonight to remember that so many of the fears that haunt our dreams and cause us to lose sleep are lies told to us by a liar in his lying world. And instead of allowing ourselves to be crippled by anxiety as we worry about the then, I think we ought to be more like the Spartans and reply, if. Look, we don't know what the future holds, but you guys, we know who holds the future. And so the next time fear begins to creep in and you find yourself worrying and overwhelmed with anxiety about all the terrible things that might happen, remember, you have an enemy who's lying to you. And you have a God who never ever leaves you or abandons you, even in the darkest moments. And instead of suffering your fear, I want you to just look it in the eye and say, if. And then go live with peace and hope. Because even in a broken world, we know our God sets all things right and makes all things new. And that means we don't need to live in fear, not for one more second of our lives.